So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to all those here. My name is Ben Brown, City of Raleigh Stormwater Engineer and Floodplain Administrator. Basically, just want to welcome you guys out to this educational session and question and answer session about upcoming regulation changes that the city is looking at. Also, we do have a Spanish language interpreter here with us. Ms. Richards, if you would like to instruct people to leave a message in chat.
Muy buenas noches a todos. Estoy aquí para traducir sus preguntas. Si tienen cualquier pregunta, por favor, escríbanla en el chat en español y con mucho gusto yo me encargo de que obtengan su respuesta. Gracias.
Thank you, Ms. Richards. So if there are any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put that in the chat feature. And basically, I identify myself as a city stormwater engineer. And what does that mean? Your city stormwater engineers help kind of manage how stormwater flows through the city after and during a rain event. Our work includes keeping the stormwater system running, and that's all of the drains, pipes, infrastructure, and also a big part of our job is to balance the growth and development with against the impacts to the environment. An important fun fact to know is the more hard surfaces in Raleigh, the more we have to manage how water flows with man-made and natural infrastructure. For the floodplain in Raleigh, it's the area next to a creek or a river that floods during a high rain event. During these high rain events, we do want the water in the floodplain to spread out when the creek channels can't handle any more rain. This actually slows water down, keeps flooding from happening up and downstream, and it also is a good way to prevent pollution from getting into the stormwater. There's a short, quick video that's been on our website that we will go through here. It's pretty informative about the aspects of the floodplain.
This is a floodplain. It's the area next to a river or creek that floods during a storm. It's made up of the floodway here and the floodway fringe here. All of these areas flood. This happens naturally. Here's how it works. When we have a lot of rain, creeks throughout the city, like Crabtree and Walnut, can rise quickly. Eventually, that water goes over the stream bank and fans out on the ground, like this. The floodplain gives the rain a place to go when streams can't handle any more water. Floodplains also help reduce pollution. The plants and soil clean and store rainwater, and it's a good habitat for wildlife, too. Most importantly, floodplains lessen the impact of severe weather. Remember, stay alert and stay safe when it floods. That means don't drive through flooded roads. Turn around and go another way. Look for flashing signs when a road is flooded. And if you see a clogged storm drain, be sure to report it. It's also a really good idea to have flood insurance if you live near a floodplain. This will help protect you and your property. To learn more, go to raleighnc.gov/stormwater. To report a clogged storm drain, call us at 919-996-6446.
All right, so probably your first question after watching that is, where is your property in relation to the floodplain? So basically, to see if you live in or near the floodplain, you can use the Raleigh IMAP system, which is web-based, and you would go to the link there that's listed down at the bottom and enter your address, and then click on the different layers and find the floodplain layer. And the pink and blue represent the floodplain. Now we'll walk you through this real quick with an example property at the city. And we'll use the Walnut Creek Wetland Center, which is 905 Peterson Street, or 950 Peterson Street, excuse me. So you just enter in your address, and once you start entering that address, it'll start to autocomplete. So it's best to just go down there and click on it. And then when the address comes up, you will go to the right of the screen to a bottom tab that says Layers. Click on Layers, and then click on the button for Floodplain. And then the opaqueness of that layer can be controlled by that little slider there, like where the cursor is, and you can make it like a little bit lighter or a little bit darker to kind of make it easier or better to see. And also, if the graphical map is not a great resource for you, you can go up to the maps, which is kind of on the right side, and go down to the aerial. So you can see our most recent aerial map to kind of see where the floodplain relates via that way. There's a few more landmarks there you can see and that sort of thing. So that's our best resource to kind of find where your property is in relation to the floodplain. And as the video talked about, the blue area is the innermost portion, which is the floodway, and the floodway fringe is the pink portion. And combined, they make up the entire floodplain. Now, do want to take a quick break to have an interactive poll to kind of get a sense of where the audience lives and kind of the background knowledge of the line. It's a real quick 2-question poll here that if you guys can fill out once we bring it up. The link to the poll will be in the chat. If you guys can click on that and fill out the poll, I'll give you about half a minute or a minute to fill that out. And the not sure answer is a viable answer if you aren't sure if you live in a floodplain or if you're not sure if you're that familiar with our current floodplain regulations. So don't be shy about that either. Get some pretty good responses there. Up to 36, we can probably get a couple more. All right, so it looks like we got about 37 responses, and it looks like between yes, no, and not sure, we're fairly even split between the yes and the no. And if you add in the unsure or the not sures, we're pretty close to even there. And then for the are you familiar with the floodplain, right? It looks like we got about 2-to-1 coverage there of people that do know about our flood regulations, which is good. Thank you all for participating in that poll. Just kind of keep you interactive, see who's still out there and paying attention. But basically, for like the floodplain to kind of come off just with the video set and a few other things, is what you need to know is the engineers cannot control how much it rains. So the areas next to a creek are expected to flood. We cannot stop this during a large storm event, but there are things you can do to stay safe. Stay alert when it rains. Don't any flooded roads. Turn around and go another way. The city at about 10 key areas has installed high water signs that flash once the water's at a dangerous level to kind of inform drivers to kind of go the other way. If there's any clogged storm drains that you all are seeing anywhere in the city, feel free to call us. You can also make measures at your own home if it's impacted by flooding to help keep it dry, and also make sure you have flood insurance. If you're in a flood zone, it's a federal requirement that you have flood insurance. If you're just adjacent to a flood zone, it is not a federal requirement, and your homeowner's insurance will not cover flooding from any sort of natural event like this. So that's something that a lot of homeowners find out too late, unfortunately. And also, another good tip for flood insurance is that there's a 30-day waiting period. So you can't see a storm forecasted on TV and immediately go sign up for flood insurance. There is a 30-day waiting period. So it's better to have it, especially if you're not in a flood zone. It's a fairly cheap alternative. All right. There's work that the city does, like I mentioned, about cleaning out the storm drains, the inlets like pictured there. We have a network of stream gauges on Crabtree and Walnut Creek to assess the flooding risk during high rain events. We've also recently added cameras to these locations so we can really get a bird's eye view as to what's going on, not just seeing like the data come across the screen, but we can actually view it through camera footage. And also all of our major stormwater projects are there to kind of help water flow more easily and safely through the city. Another big piece of this, like I mentioned earlier, is managing growth and in development within the city. So this is this was the initiative to also update the floodplain regulations. Basically, this update came from request of the city council due to the higher storms that we had been seeing for the past few years. And our Stormwater Management Commission went through a fairly exhaustive stakeholder process to look at our current regulations and see if there's any changes that they could do to help manage growth and in the floodplain any better. And with our current regulations, property owners and developers can now build in a portion of the floodplain that's on their property. That percentage is 50% for most properties. The proposed changes would prohibit building any new structures in the floodplain and would also require new public roads to have dry access during flooding events. So emergency vehicles and things like that could still have access even when it's flooding. This change mainly impacts people who own vacant lots and areas where there are no existing buildings. And people with small properties would be exempt from this. Right now, the proposed ordinance change caps that small property limit at half an acre, so half an acre or less. And then also any existing structure that's in the floodplain would be exempt from this. Now, if you own a vacant lot in the floodplain with the proposed regulations, what can you still do? It's mainly ground level uses when you're not changing the topography or fill on your property. So there's farming and wildlife for pastures and outdoor plants and nurseries and wildlife sanctuaries. You can have lawns, gardens, parking areas and play areas, or with recreation, golf courses, tennis courts, picnic grounds, and parks. As long as you're not changing that ground elevation, that's really the key piece there. The benefits of updating these regs, basically to protect people and the environment. We're basically trying to making these changes to keep the flooding near creeks getting worse over time. By keeping any new structures out, there will be more room for water to spread out and store in the existing floodplain. And then also, if you have less development directly near streams, there's less safety concerns about hazardous areas that need attention during flooding. Like if people don't live in the floodplain, there's no reason to have to evacuate people from the floodplain during a large rain event. And also, a healthy floodplain means streams will be cleaner, and also the soils will be cleaner. And once again, the ability to store water during a flooding event is key for a floodplain. Now, our next steps. Now, this is a public forum to kind of just introduce these regulation changes to the general public. Our next steps will start our normal ordinance change process, which has already been authorized by the City Council, and the tentative schedule is to go to the Planning Commission at their regularly scheduled January 12th meeting, which is a Tuesday. And now the Planning Commission will have a chance to discuss these regulations, go over them, debate, and come to a decision. And at that point, the Planning Commission will recommend a public hearing date to the City Council. And based on the calendar dates and looking at the schedule for the first of the year, the absolute first time this public hearing date would be with City Council would be the City Council's first meeting in March, which is the March 2nd City Council meeting. I'm not saying it's going to be officially the March 2nd City Council meeting, but that's really the absolute first time that it could get to the City Council for a public hearing. Now, looking ahead, city staff's got continued work to do in the area of floodplain management to just protect the people and the floodplain. More floodplain monitoring and alerts are on the way in the next few years. And also to get the more real-time alerts out to the residents that are actually in the floodplain quickly. This also includes a pilot program that the city is running now for a flood early warning system, which we hope to expand that pilot to the Walnut Creek Basin. Right now it's started in the Crabtree Creek Basin. Also, city staff working together with property owners to decide the best options for your property. This could include voluntary purchase of vacant lots or voluntary purchase of developed lots to return that to green space. But I must emphasize, these are voluntary purchases. This is nothing that the city would go in and do without the permission of the private property owner. And also on floodplains in these areas, it could be an option to establish a conservation easement, which could benefit the floodplain and also the private property owner. The overall goal the city is looking to achieve here is to have less people living in the floodplain and get them out of harm's way. And now we're welcome to discuss your questions and feedback. You will need to put your questions into the chat feature so we can talk about them. And we have various city staff, even besides myself, to talk about them. And also, if you have any Spanish language questions, we have a translator here as well that we can translate those questions for you as you go.
Ben, hey, this is Wayne. I have a few questions coming in from chat. The first one is, when was the last time the FEMA maps were updated, and what's the plan for those updates?
The last official FEMA map update was in May of 2006. Currently, Wake County has preliminary flood maps that have been public since 2015. Based on FEMA and the state of North Carolina, we would like to have those new preliminary maps become the updated maps sometime within the year 2021, but I have not heard a firm date on that, so I can't promise you an exact date on that. But FEMA and the state of North Carolina will give us 6 months lead time for an adoption once those maps are ready to be adopted.
Okay, good. Here's the next one. I live close to the floodplain and am impacted by what is known as flood soils. I'd like to learn more about what that means.
Yes, so it is a type of floodplain within the city of Raleigh. They're basically areas outside of the FEMA floodplain, which everyone is fairly familiar with. But the floodplain soils area is a city floodplain area, which could be impacted by these regulations as well. And city staff will be happy to sit down and discuss more specific questions about your property if you'd like to reach out and get in contact with like myself and Wayne.
Here's another question. What is the recourse if you are next to the flood zone but not technically in it? My street and homes are across from me are in the pink zone of the floodplain.
So if you're still in the pink zone and so proposed regulation could have an on you, especially if your property is vacant. If there's an existing structure on it, then that existing structure will be allowed to stay and be maintained and that sort of thing.
Maybe talk about too, I think this might be getting if you're close or maybe even portion of your property is in the floodplain, and how would the proposed regulation changes impact properties that are partially in the floodplain, Ben?
Yep. So if your property is partially in the floodplain, the area that is in the floodplain, you would not be able to place a new structure in that area based on the proposed regulations if you were over that half acre exemption size.
And here's one question: define small property, and I think you just said that, but maybe worth reiterating again the exemption size, Ben.
Yep, half an acre, like right now.
So if you're under half an acre, the rules just stay exactly as they are right now, correct?
Correct.
Do the new regulations affect residential and commercial alike?
Yes, they.
Okay. People most impacted by these proposed changes are those with unimproved lots. It says surely that is of more relevance. So maybe just review again the distinction and maybe the why we're doing it that way.
Yes, so basically, after going through the stakeholder process and in discussions with the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission, it was thought to really make an effort to keep any new development from moving into the floodplain. So the existing development that's there be allowed to stay, but not allow any new development of that floodplain. And so that would keep any new structures or any new folks out of harm's way that aren't currently in harm's way in the floodplain now. So that was the intent on that.
Okay, keep going here. Can we get the presentation slides afterwards, or will it be posted? So maybe, and this may be a question for Kristen, what would be the best way for people to get the slides? And I do believe we're going to post a recording of this as well, correct?
Yes, so if you visit the website in the next couple of days, the information should be available. And that's raleighnc.gov. And if you search floodplain, you'll find the information.
And Kristen, that'll be the presentation as well as the recording of this meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Here's a question about the Downtown South project. What effect did these new regulations have on the Downtown South project?
Okay, so downtown project is in the middle of their rezoning process right now. The case was just heard at Planning Commission this morning. But one of the conditions that the Downtown South applicants are offering is to comply with the proposed regulations as they are right now, which would basically keep any new structures from getting the floodplain on Walnut Creek that kind of goes through their property, because their property is kind of bisected by Walnut Creek, and the zoning condition that the applicants have offered would keep any new structures or any roadways from going into the floodplain at Walnut Creek there.
Okay, good. Here's another one. Updates from FIM alerts and USGS are hourly, but the city has cameras and quicker updates on stream levels. How can residents get access to this information?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's part of what the flood early warning system pilot program that I talked about. We are hoping to be able to push out warnings ahead of the storms rising. That's and basically using future forecasting to say like when we think a creek's going to rise. But the city is exploring all options right now as far as either text alerts or email alerts to kind of get those notices out, and they be more location based instead of like the whole city, just the areas impacted.
Yeah, and I will just supplement that, Ben. I know we have a project right now with USGS. We just recently signed a contract with them that we are updating to a newer, what's called Alert 2 protocol system that will have updates every 5 minutes that will make those updates more frequent. That's in process still, though. We piloted a couple sites for that, but many of the sites, the updates are still 15 minutes or many are still hourly. And that's as frequently as we get them too at some sites. Here's one. What is the plan to remove debris and garbage as well as fallen trees? These are obvious obstructions to water flow and healthy floodplains. So Ben, maybe talk about, city responsibility versus private responsibility and so forth.
Yeah, so it is kind of in Raleigh, North Carolina, is that the extreme responsibility of the underlying property owner, which that across a roadway and things like that, the city will go out during and after a storm, kind of clean that debris out and get it taken care of. But if it's on private property, the city doesn't actually have like the right to go in there and clear that out without getting a right of entry from that underlying property owner. So we don't have wide permission to go into any creek and clear out that debris and have to work with the individual property owner. So that's a longer process. But if it's debris clogging near a public street or in a city park or on a greenway and things like that, then we can get out there fairly quickly, get our maintenance crews out there to clean those out as soon as we can.
Okay, Ben, here's one related to the question was up about properties that are partially in the floodplain. Will the city be recommending that properties that have a portion of the property in the floodway fringe still get their current allowed density, but just transfer it to parts that aren't in the floodway fringe, as discussed in the stakeholder meetings?
Yes, that will be part of this to get that transfer density to the areas of your property that aren't in the floodway fringe. And just a real quick note that I got from the meeting host is if you got questions, make sure you're directing them to Wayne Miles, because that's how he's able to read those. If you direct them to the host, we might get to him a little bit slower.
Here's one. Who would we contact about a possible voluntary purchase, and I think that's referring to a possible voluntary buyout of property in the floodplain.
Yeah, and you could reach out to myself or to Wayne as well, and basically to meet and talk about those properties. That's obviously going to be a property by property kind of case, but I mean that's something we definitely want to talk about.
Okay, and I'm putting Ben's email address in the chat to everyone as well. So feel free to reach out to Ben or myself, Wayne Miles.
Yep.
Here is one, Ben. Is a stormwater retention pond allowed to be in the floodway?
In the flood, no, not, because currently under FEMA regulations, you're not allowed to change the grade in a floodway without doing a comprehensive flood of that creek channel. So, like without that flood study and showing a no impact, you would not be allowed to put a stormwater in the floodway. They are currently allowed floodway fringe, and so that sort of grading is currently allowed in the floodway fringe today.
Here's another question about flood soils. So I think it might be worth making that distinction between flood soils, or also called alluvial soils, versus the floodplain.
Yeah, so like I said, the flood-prone soil areas are outside the FEMA floodplain, so it's outside a studied floodplain, and it's basically an area that is able to kind of keep people safe that are closer to streams, because these flood-prone soils are usually like right around creeks and streams, and this is in full floodplain, but and flood-prone soils is that the soils maps for Wake County are from this, so the flood are not as accurate as they should be. So soil scientists can go out there and flood-prone soils on difference.
Good, and I think it's probably worth mentioning the same IMAPS GIS mapping site that's on the city's website, where Ben showed how you could turn on the floodplain. There also is a layer where you can turn on soils, and it will show a hatching of where flood-prone soils are located based on those soil maps that Ben referenced. And as he said, they are a little outdated, so they often need to be validated based on current conditions, but that is a layer you can turn on in IMAPS.
Yep.
Okay. Regarding the exemption for lots that are currently developed, will the new floodplain restriction allow the building of new detached structures on a lot that has an existing home, or would that be prohibited?
If your lot size was over half an acre, this ordinance would prohibit that, because it would be a new structure in the floodplain.
So because it's a developed lot, it would fall under the rules the way they are right now, correct, Ben?
Correct. You're right.
And so that would allow a detached structure, but it would have to be constructed
150%.
above the flood. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe describe that again. So yeah, so let me read the question again. Regarding the exemption for lots that are currently developed, will the new floodplain restriction allow the building of new detached structures on a lot that has an existing home, or would that be prohibited?
So yes, at half an acre, subject to rate, which limits your floodplain. And it space that detached structure would have to be 2 feet above the 100.
Right. So that's the way it is right now. So because it's a developed lot, it will continue to be regulated under the regulations as they are right now. The changes are only proposed for vacant lots that are over half an acre. Okay, how specifically will these new regulations improve the flooding situation? I can take that one if you'd like, Ben.
That's fine.
And then you can add if you want. So really the new regulations are not designed to improve the flooding situation. They are designed to keep the flooding from getting worse. So anytime additional structures or fill are put in the floodplain, that takes up flood storage that would no longer be available and incrementally cause flooding either upstream or downstream to become worse. So these regulations are not designed to improve flooding, but they're designed to keep it from continuing to get worse by restricting the amount of additional development that would continue to occur in the floodplain.
That is correct.
Okay, will this new regulation include future conditions for flood hazard areas?
Yes, it will.
Yeah. So as our maps are right now, they will be based on the future conditions.
Correct, because currently we enforce the future conditions floodplain the same way as we do our regular floodway fringe. So
Okay, here's one asking Ben, just for a clarification again of the key feature of what cannot be done in the floodplain under the proposed revised regulations that can be done now.
basically, percent of the floodplain area on that vacant lot. If this rate that's the way it's written or proposed, then you would not be allowed to put fill or structures in 100% of the floodplain area on your lot.
Okay. Here's one. Can a retaining wall be built in the floodway?
Retaining wall cannot be built into the floodway. Some sort of flood study.
Right. So no retaining wall in the floodway, and
That one, floodway regulation would be changed for this regulation.
right, that's remaining the same. Okay.
Correct.
Here's one. Options to property owners. Will you give property owners time to make something work on their property? I'm assuming that means maybe the timing of these regulations coming into effect.
I would anticipate, based on history of fairly lengthy lead time of probably weeks to months. But that'll eventually get to the council that much lead time to do. And as with all these regulations, in place, authorship can be approved. Very regulations.
Okay. Here's one. What is the website, again, to look up if you are in the floodplain? Kristen, would you mind please dropping the IMAPS link into the chat for us, so folks that weren't able to catch that earlier in the presentation will have that?
Yep, I'll do that now.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, here's one. Is there any limit on increases of impervious surfaces on small residential lots? For example, adding paved areas, expanded houses, etc.
The addition of more area that can be the is or and
Okay, so there are limits on increases of impervious surface, but that's not changing with these regulation changes that are being proposed. Those are already in place, correct? Okay. And you're breaking up a little bit, I think, Ben. It may be worth turning off your video so folks can hear you better to help with the bandwidth. Okay. Here's one.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better. We can hear you. Okay, here's another question, Ben. Will the issuing of building permits be effective before March 2nd?
The issuing of building permits will be more tied to whenever this regulation were to go effective, if it does get passed by the city council. So the March 2nd date was more of an estimate by staff with how quickly this might make it to public hearing. So the ordinance definitely won't be effective by March 2nd. So the issuing of building permits will only be effective once council decides on what any effective date would be for this ordinance.
Here's one, Ben. I think maybe talking about the variance procedure. It says, if the goal is for the public good, how is it fair to take 100% value from a property owner for the benefit of everyone without paying the property owner for the loss in value?
And I think that's where that variance procedure comes in. I mean, that would be an area where the city council would have the power to look at that hardship and say that this land would be allowed to develop at that point if that hardship was shown.
Okay. Here's another one about creek maintenance, falling trees, they clog up the flow. Is that the actual citizens, or are checks done?
There are checks done for creek crossings of public roads and in public parks. For creeks that are on private property, it would be the responsibility of that private property owner to make sure those are clean and free of debris.
Okay, here's a question. What about current parcels over half an acre that are looking to be rezoned and subdivided? Will these parcels have to comply with the new rules if they're approved?
Yes, they would.
Okay. Does FEMA and the Army Corps have more say over land than the city of Raleigh?
As far as the maintenance of land, they don't really have any more say over the maintenance of those streams or anything like that. So they don't, so like they aren't able to go on private property either and just maintain a stream that's on private property, if that's what the question was referring to.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe a distinction here between, Section 404 Army Corps of Engineers, wetlands, and state water quality permits, which is really a separate permitting issue, right?
Yes, that's correct. That's more about getting into the surface waters and getting into that flow with some sort of structure, be it a culvert or a bridge or something like that.
Okay, and here's one, would like to determine whether my property is in the floodplain. I'd say, again, let's look in the chat for the link to the Raleigh iMaps. And then you can type in your address and turn on the floodplain layer. That will help you see where your house is relative to the floodplain. Is it possible to view the proposed flood maps before they are adopted? And maybe talk about where folks could find those?
Yes, I can put that in the chat, but it's through the state's website. It's their it's called their Frizz website, which is a flood reduction site that you can search your property and you can see the existing maps and the preliminary maps and kind of see how the changes are for your property.
Yes, and here's the question about, is there guidance or rules for how to best stabilize stream banks if erosion is moving a stream closer to a structure? I would suggest this person contact us and we can put you in touch with our drainage assistance group, which is able to come out and assess erosion issues, especially if they are near structures in infringing upon a structure, and you may possibly qualify for funding under the city program to assist with that, depending on a priority score. If not, we can at least give you guidance and a little bit of assistance in assessing the situation and making recommendations. Okay, here's one. Lots with existing development are listed as exempt from these regulations. Does that apply to the entire lot?
Just be the portion of the lot that's in the floodplain.
So I think the question, Ben, is if you've got a fairly large lot that maybe has development on a portion of the lot, does that exempt the whole lot from the regulation changes?
It would really just be the flood area. You wouldn't be subject to the no new structures in that area, but more the 50% rules that are currently in place.
Okay, so those would stay the same, basically. Okay, here's one. Why is the decision process so slow? Are there political, environmental, or bureaucratic obstacles? I'm not sure if that means the floodplain regulation changes we're making, which is a normal text change process which goes through and is managed by the Planning Commission. It has been about 2 years since we started this, so it's been a fairly slow process. We wanted to get a lot of stakeholder focus group input behind what the regulation changes would look like and take it through this process. This may be referring to the FEMA map changes. And Ben, maybe you can talk a little bit about what has to happen for the FEMA map changes to occur. Ben, I think you're breaking up a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
any
better.
Sorry. Basically, the preliminary maps went public in 2015, and since that time, there's been issues with appeals. With some on the fringes of Wake County, and that's taken longer for the flood mapping folks to take care of. And then the past year, it's been kind of in limbo at the federal level to figure out kind of when the effective date is going to be for these maps. So in talking to at the state level, they're kind of as frustrated as we are right now with why these maps aren't kind of moving faster and forward. And by all indications, we were looking at mid 2021 for these maps to be effective. That's probably going to be pushed back by at least a couple of months now, since we haven't heard any official date. But I don't really have knowledge of what is at the federal level with these maps. So.
Okay, here's a question, Ben, from someone who looks like they're going through a specific sketch plan review and wanting to know kind of how this will come into play and having questions. So it sounds like it's all going to be dependent on when these regulations actually go into effect versus what is the trigger point where if they, what would they have to do to get in under the old regulations, Ben, before the new regulations would come into play?
Yeah, they would have to apply for a permit before the effective date of the new regulations to be subject to the current regulations.
Okay, so as long as they put their permit application in before the date of the effective date of the new changes.
That's correct.
Okay, and I just say to that person, again, Ben or I, please send us an email if you have specific questions about that permitting process and the timing of that. Okay. If I divide my lot, can I then be exempt?
I guess that depends on the timing of that subdivision. Subdivisions would be subject to this regulation once it becomes effective, so it depends on when you would do that subdivision.
Okay. Can you go into more details on the definition of a structure?
I mean, pretty much anything that you would need to get a building permit for would probably be the short answer from the city to construct.
Okay, and then a similar question, definition for lawn, yards, gardens, parking areas. I think effectively what we're saying is at grade uses that wouldn't have structure or fill would still be allowed, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Could an increase in the promotion and installation of more green stormwater infrastructure by developers in and out of the floodplain reduce the amount of floodplain area required to manage flooding? If so, are there any notable projects that are effective? So I'm glad to take that one, and Ben, you can jump in. I do think it's important to understand a green stormwater infrastructure is primarily a water quality improvement device and practices. So we are very supportive of those, and they, in some cases, can be beneficial to improve what I would consider minor, very minor flooding issues. In general, green stormwater infrastructure devices are not going to be beneficial in terms of reducing flooding in the floodplain. The floodplain receives flow from very large upstream areas, and the amount of stormwater generally controlled by green stormwater infrastructure is relatively minor compared to what's occurring in the floodplain. So I think that's a good question and a good distinction. We like GSI, but it's not really it's more of a water quality improvement practice than a flood reduction practice. Here's one. Will there be any recourse against property owners that already have built in the floodplain?
No, that would count as existing development, and that would be outside of this ordinance change.
Right. Right. Okay, here's one. If a Flomer is approved, and I'll define that, that's a conditional change of mapping, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Map revision is approved, development activity becomes allowable. What city authorization is required to petition for a Clomer from FEMA?
So for the conditional letter of map revision application, there is a signature page that the city official, usually the floodplain administrator, has to sign to get that application processed. And once you go through that process and final it out with the final letter of map revision, whereas you built your project and the maps are officially just revised now, at that point, that would be your new floodplain boundary as recognized by FEMA and by the city of Raleigh. So you would be beholden to the regulations for that new floodplain boundary.
Okay, here's one, and I do have to apologize to folks. We're getting a lot of chats, which is very good, and I'm working through them slowly, but we are running behind. If folks need to drop off, we will continue answering these as long as there's questions that haven't been answered, and we'll post this later. And we'll look for a way to get any additional information out to answer these questions too, but we'll keep going. But I apologize, there are a number of questions I can tell are still coming in that we will not be able to get to till 7 o'clock, but we'll keep going. Here's a question about, do we know where the FEMA floodplain map revisions are getting held up? And I don't know that we do specifically, right, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhere at the federal level. That's kind of the state and the city of Raleigh are kind of waiting on them to give us the go ahead to start like the adoption process. So we're kind of stuck in that area. There will be, once they give us the go ahead, there will be another 90-day appeal period that people will be able to look at the preliminary maps again and see if they have any issues and make those appeals through our office at the city of Raleigh, and we will communicate them to the state and FEMA. And then after that 90-day appeal process, that's when they'll give us the 6-month lead time for the adoption of the new maps.
Okay, good, thanks. Here's one, Ben, that says, do you expect this to impact the new development at North Hills off St. Albans?
If they're not in for building permits by the time this ordinance change would go effective, and they're proposing any new structures to the floodplain, then yes, they would be just required to keep any new structures out of the floodplain as well.
Okay. Okay. Here's one about when would the regulations take effect? I think you've already mentioned that, but maybe repeat real quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be dependent on council and if they even approve the ordinance change, and then kind of what time frame they want to put on it for when it would go effective. Like a standard ordinance change has a week turnaround. The last time we had a major flood ordinance change like this, I believe we had a 3-month time frame from approval to effectiveness. So it's really up to the city council, but they're gonna give lead time on this, that they're not gonna do it in like a week or two. It's gonna be probably weeks or months once it's approved, if it's approved.
Okay. Here's one. How are we cooperating with regional issues? Raleigh or Wake County cannot manage the floods alone. What are we doing with regional cooperation? So really, and I think that's a good point in that these proposed regulation changes make Raleigh's regulations more closely resemble what Wake County has already adopted on the books. Is that a fair assessment, Ben?
That's correct.
And in terms of cooperation, we do have regular discussions with Wake County. We are embarking on updated watershed planning processes and interact with the county during those processes. So that is an ongoing effort. Okay, there's a few specific questions that I don't think we'll be able to address specifically. If you have a local specific issue, please drop us a note with your address, and we'll try to get back to you and schedule a site visit if we can. Okay, here's a property that fairly large lot, 26 acres, about half of it in the floodplain, in the process of selling land. How will this affect the property value? So again, and I think one of the things we talked about, especially on large lots, is we're working to make provisions within larger undeveloped lots to shift or transfer the development density potential of the lot out of the floodplain onto the remainder of the property as much as we can under the existing regulations. Is that fair, Ben?
Yes, no, that's completely fair.
Okay. And I know you mentioned this, but maybe worth mentioning again, the actual text that's being proposed. When will that be available? I know we're close, right?
It's on our website as of today.
Today, good. Okay.
Now, the only thing I'll tell people is that this is why you still have time to kind of give us comments and things like that, because this won't be the official ordinance language that will go to Planning Commission. That could change between now and January 12th, but the major components will stay the same. But if there's details that need to be fine-tuned and things like that, then that can definitely be changed. But as far as the no new structures in the floodplain and the dry access for public streets, that's going to stay the same. But as far as like the ordinance language that we have there, I mean, feel free to give us comments on that as well.
Here's one maybe related to the timing of these regulation changes versus the timing of the new FEMA maps being adopted. And I know it's hard to anticipate because we don't know when the FEMA maps are going to be updated, but at this point, is it fair to say we would anticipate these rules would go into place before the new FEMA maps were put in place, Ben, based on our best estimate?
I think based on our estimates, and since we don't have a definitive time for the new FEMA maps, and I would say, I would assume that these regulation changes, if passed, would go into effect before the new preliminary maps. Now, if we get a good solid date about the FEMA maps, and there's a good deliberation at the Planning Commission and City Council, there could be a push to kind of line those dates up, but like without having a concrete date for those new FEMA maps, I wouldn't say with any certainty that those dates would line up, and I would assume the regulation changes would go into effect prior.
Okay, here's one. When will property owners of floodplain vacant lots be notified and given the options? What are the options for floodplain lot owners?
So our,
go
go ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead, Ben.
So our plan is to keep all the affected property owners updated as this moves through the process, as far as the Planning Commission into the City Council and that sort of thing. So we know kind of, the property owners most affected will know kind of what's going on and where we are. This won't be like a one and done notification, but do want to put in a plug-in for communication staff. Is this virtual town hall is the first time we've ever done this for any sort of stormwater regulation change, especially ahead of the process getting to public hearing. So we're just trying to reach as many people as possible, like with this, and we plan to keep the affected property owners up to date throughout the process.
I think it's fair to say, though, that if you're going to comment on this, now is the time to do it, right? We want to hear from everyone now. And please go into the survey link and fill out the survey, as well as comments, pro or con on the proposed changes, because there may not be another opportunity to comment before this is decided by city council. I mean, this is the process, and now is the time to speak up for or against the proposed regulation changes.
That's correct.
Here's a question about the webcam pictures. You mentioned the cameras. So no, those will not be available to the public. Those are for city purposes only. Here's one. If the new regulations require public roadways to be built out of the floodplain, does that mean if you have floodplain on your site, you will not be allowed to fill in the floodplain to meet this requirement? So I think that's a good question, Ben, about the road access, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for building a road access on a larger property that's going to end up being a public road, I would anticipate during that design phase that even with our regulations now, that you would have to do a flood study of some sort to kind of see what the impacts of the fill in that road would be. And with that flood study process, you could show kind of what the impacts are. And the ordinance is written such that would allow the fill to be placed, keeping the impacts within an acceptable level.
Yep, good. So here's one about the density shifting. R4, 2 acres, 0.3 acres is in the floodplain. Is your will the loss of density be shifted? And I think that's yes, right? That's how we're proposing the rule changes, that the density would remain.
Within that
property, within that individual property. Correct. Right.
Correct.
Okay. I'm flipping through. A lot of these are similar to ones we've answered before. I'm still reading through some. A lot of these are very similar to ones that we've answered. Okay, dry access during a major storm event. What is a major storm event? Will the city and DOT be held to this standard? So yes, that's the plan, is that would be a 100-year storm event for new public access, correct?
That's correct.
And now I know the city that we will be adopting this. What's our authority over regulating DOT, Ben?
They have to abide to our local ordinance as far as the floodplain is concerned.
Okay. Okay, I'm starting to catch up. Okay, would a new deck or pergola be allowed in the floodplain?
As long as there's an existing structure already there, it would be subject to our current rules and regulations that are on the books today.
Okay. It says, do these rules apply to the 1% as well as the 0.2% annual chance of flooding zones?
It would just be the 1% annual chance and the future 1% annual chance, not the 0.2% or 500-year floodplain.
Okay, and I see the IMAPS link is in the chat. Thank you, Kristen, for entering that. If anyone still needs to find that. Is it okay to build boardwalks in marshy areas in a floodplain on private property, or is that also considered a structure?
Depending what's already there and our current regulations would also have something to say about building a boardwalk and how close you are to the creek and that sort of thing, if it's in the floodway or not, in the floodway fringe, and if it's adjacent to it, or if it's a part of an existing structure. If it's just vacant land, then you would be subject to this proposed regulation and our existing regulations, kind of depending on the situation. Like our parks folks, like if this passes, they will be subject to this and have to perform flood studies for any structures like a boardwalk or anything like that on a vacant piece of property.
Question about the variance process. Is that done by city council or by the Board of Adjustments?
The Board of Adjustments.
Okay, so the floodplain variance process is done, and that's the way it is right now, correct, Ben?
Well, there's a text change currently ongoing separate from this one that's moving the appeal or the variance process from the city council to the Board of Adjustment. But this text change was written such that that Board of Adjustment text change would pass and it would be the Board of Adjustment.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's not in place now, but we expect that would already be in place before this text change was in effect.
Correct. That should be going to public hearing in January.
Okay.
That text change, not the floodplain text change.
Another question about cleaning debris of the creek, and the distinction there is the creeks are where they're private property. It's a private property owner to do the maintenance and clearing of debris out of those.
Correct.
Okay. how is the 0.5 acre size determined? Someone lives on a lot that's 0.67 acres and should be exempted. So I think, again, if the lot is already developed, it's also exempted regardless of size, right?
Correct.
Someone's asking if they can go back and watch this again. And yes, this will be posted on the city's website as soon as possible. It may be a couple days, but we will post the entire presentation and Q&A in its entirety. Would you be able to rebuild if you're in the floodplain? So yeah, maybe talk about, again, a developed lot is exempted from the changes, but I think it still merits discussion of how the current rules read for rebuilding in the floodplain, Ben. And those won't change, but I'd maybe describe that process right now.
Correct. If you're in the floodway fringe, you would be able to rebuild, but to the footprint you would currently have before the substantial damage or whatever happened. But any expansion would be subject to the current 50% rule that's on the books today.
Here's one, Ben. Is a city easement on the property subtracted from the size of the lot to determine lot size as it refers to lot size regulations?
I don't believe it is per the county's calculation of lot size, and that's what we'd be going off of, Wake County calculation of lot size.
Okay, there's a couple questions about specific properties. If I'm not confident I can keep all of these chats. If everyone has specific property questions, we'll certainly try to reach out to you. The safest way is to send Ben or myself an email, wayne.miles@raleighnc.gov or ben.brown@raleighnc.gov. Okay. Will a retention pond add floodplain to my property?
No, it should not.
Okay. And the link to the survey is also in the chat, I see. So and it's also on the city's website. If you go to raleighnc.gov and search on floodplain, you'll find a lot of information there, including a link to the survey that we do encourage everyone to take the survey. There's room in there for comments that we would welcome. Here's some requests for staff that could participate in citizen meetings or other groups meetings. And yes, we would be glad to Zoom in if anyone is having other supporting meetings that are existing. You'd like Ben or myself to Zoom in and talk about these regulations, please drop us an email. We would be glad to help do that. Here's one. Do we feel like regulations will devalue your property? I think that is a very specific situation. Again, it directly impacts only the the vacant properties over half an acre. And I think the vacant properties that are 100% in the floodplain, they will be impacted the most. Properties that are only a portion in the floodplain with the provisions of shifting density from the area that's in the floodplain to the area outside of the floodplain, we do believe that significantly mitigates any impacts to those properties. And that's why that was an important provision to incorporate. If a public street is in the floodplain, can a driveway be built to serve an existing lot in the floodplain to get to the developable area on the lot? And yes. And that provision doesn't apply to individual driveways for single lots. It's only a new public road. And again, if you're connecting to a public road that's already in the floodplain and floods, we'd have to look at that on a case-by-case basis to see what the requirement would be, I guess, right, Ben?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, I think we caught up on the questions. We certainly thank everyone for joining. Ms. Richards, I've not seen any questions in Spanish. Have you had any private questions that were sent to you in Spanish that we would need to translate and address?
Not at all, sir. I've been watching and listening, and no questions in Spanish.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you joining and helping out. And anyway, we
Absolutely.
will let you know if we do have any other emails or anything else. Folks that reach out in Spanish, we'll get you involved. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. And I will, I guess, begin the closing process and thank everyone who's participated. We had a great turnout. At one point, I saw well over 100 attendees. So that's an excellent turnout. We know this is an important issue. We've been getting a lot of questions and comments in support, as well as folks who have concerns about these. We want to hear from both. Please do fill out our survey on site and add your comments. If there were questions, specific questions, or anything else that you didn't feel like we answered to your satisfaction, please do email Ben and myself. We certainly want to try to. We've tried to answer as many questions as we could, but if there was something you don't think we addressed, please let us know. We will try to get that information back out to you and update information on the website to reflect that. We will be posting this recording on the website, as well as additional information. Ben, Kristen, any closing comments before we close?
I don't think so. Just thank everyone for coming out.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. We'll adjourn. Hope everyone has a good night. Take care.